CEEY, a leading think tank in Mexico, is hosting the Social Mobility Summit 2016. Some of the world's main experts will come together to discuss and help establish a broad agenda for research and policy making. Follow us via live streaming at socialmobilitysummit.org.
We're about to begin the final session with Julio Serrano.
Well, this is the last presentation of the day. I know most of you are tired, so I'm going to make it as brief as possible. First, a warning. For all of you who are expecting a lot of correlation tables, a lot of variables, formulas, you're going to be disappointed. This is a talk about the center that I'm glad to be part of, the Espinosa Yglesias Research Center, how it was formed, why we came to study social mobility. I want to also show you some of our main results in Mexico, social mobility results. I want to tell you also what the future holds for the center in terms of social mobility. And I'm going to finish this conversation with an invitation to all of you. First, the who. As I mentioned this morning in the introduction of this great event, the CEEY, the Espinosa Yglesias Research Center, was established in 2005 by the Espinosa Garcia Foundation. The center is the brainchild of Doctora Amparo Espinosa Garcia, who is here with us. She's the one who thought about creating a think tank in Mexico. She saw the need to do research and to debate policies to contribute to the future of Mexico. The center is established and has the name of Manuel Espinosa Yglesias, who is the person who funded the Fundación Espinosa Garcia, which is the sponsor of CEEY. So the name of this research center holds is that of Manuel Espinosa Yglesias, who was a businessman and a banker, and he also happens to be my grandfather. This is a non-for-profit organization, has no political agenda, it has no outside financing apart from the foundation. Then we come to the why. Why study social mobility in Mexico? And this dates back to almost more than a decade ago. And I was reading an article, actually a series in the New York Times called Class Matters. And in that series of articles, there were some regarding social mobility. And I had heard the term before, but I didn't know that much about it. When I read these pieces, I immediately started to get more involved. I started to get a lot more interested in social mobility. The idea of someone being able to achieve their potential, which is very related to social mobility, has always appealed to me. I think it's just so much waste for someone to be curtailed of his abilities or her abilities by outside factors that I just always have thought that being able to achieve your potential is paramount. And social mobility has a lot to do with that. So the subject interested me, from the get-go. And I wanted to know more about how was the situation in Mexico. These articles were related to the US, obviously, but Mexico I had some intuition about social mobility in Mexico was, but I wanted to know, like, with more technical information with that the situation of social mobility. So I asked around, and perhaps to my surprise, there was very little. David this morning was saying how there's not that much data in the US regarding social mobility. And here, there was, at the time we started, it was almost non-existent. So at that point, I said, well, this is something I would like to pursue. And I remember that I spoke with my wife, who's also here, about my desire to know more about social mobility in Mexico. And by chance, it happened that she was doing her PhD in sociology at Columbia, and she had a classmate, her name is Florencia Torche, whom I believe some of you know, and she was at that time studying social mobility in Chile. She was doing a survey in Chile to measure social mobility. So, I mean, it was a great coincidence. And at that point, we contacted Florencia. We got the center involved with Enrique. The foundation was kind enough to support the project. They also immediately liked the idea of getting to social mobility. And well, that was the start. After that, we conducted the first national survey of social mobility survey at the national level. There had never been something like that done in Mexico, and that's how we started. From there comes the what, and the CEEY began to focus and to deploy more of its resources to the study of social mobility. And we formulated our task to be to do research and generate information on social mobility and socioeconomic well-being in Mexico. I mean, obviously, our main task was first to generate information. We knew that in order to study social mobility, we needed to know what was the situation, and our goal was never just to get more information about social mobility in Mexico. We wanted to take it a step further. We wanted to do something more practical. We wanted to not only get information about social mobility, we wanted to do research and eventually come up with policies that we could persuade government officials to follow and to do something about improving social mobility in Mexico. So our goal was, it was a very, now that I think of it, a very ambitious goal. Since there was pretty much nothing done in Mexico at that point, we wanted to generate information and then disseminate that information and come up with policies to influence the government. And I mean, again, at that point, it was difficult, and it's still difficult because the government, the idea of social mobility is not in our DNA in Mexico. It's not something that is, talked about, and very few people understand it. And I mean, and I get why it's difficult to understand. It's a hard concept to grasp. Social mobility has so many dimensions. You can talk about relative mobility, absolute mobility, educational mobility, economic mobility, intergenerational. So it's a hard concept, and in Mexico it's been hard to get officials to try to make an effort to understand it and more or less to pursue policies to improve it. We've had some successes. the official statistics body entity in Mexico called INEGI, I believe we played a part in getting them to measure some variables in social mobility in their surveys. So I think we have done some work there, and we have managed to get some successes. The how. As I said, we generate quantitative information. The two national surveys, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a little while. And we also do qualitative information, which is something we were just talking about at the table with Richard, who's not here right now. And I think it's very interesting. This was an idea that came from Dr. Espinosa Garcia, which was, let's try to put a human face in the numbers. Let's try to get some stories where you see the mobility, where you see someone that came up in a difficult situation, in a poor environment, and that was able to overcome it. So that's something that we've tried to do, and actually we're about to come out with a book with 10 stories about people who have been able to overcome the odds, basically, and really climb the socioeconomic ladder in Mexico. So we do qualitative information. We deal with the qualitative information. How do we do research with information? We have, we have researchers in the research center that work there full time, and then we have outside experts who have been kind enough to help us. Some of them are here today in this room. So it's been a collaborative effort. And then again, the third part, or the third leg, is we generate information, we do research, and then we try to come up with policy recommendations, which we've done, and we've been pushing them with government officials. About our surveys, we've done 2 ESRU surveys on social mobility in Mexico, national surveys. They're representative, and these are intergenerational surveys. They're cross-section with current and retrospective information. So that's our main product, I would say, information product. We're going to start doing the next survey next year in 2017. Our publications, you can see there, we publish 5 books with 40 research papers, policy reports, and joint research projects. What else have we done? We've given scholarships to students who want to study social mobility, who want to use our data to do research. We have an annual summer school about social mobility, and we have an itinerant exhibition of social mobility that travels from city to city, showing the results of our research. That is targeted to school children, to high school children, and promoting the idea of staying in school and going to university. Now, what I would like to do is show you some of the results, the main results that we've come up with through these surveys and our research. But first, I would like to give you some context about Mexico. Well, Mexico, just to give you some ideas about the size of our economy, we are, I think, the 12th or 13th largest economy in the world. In terms of income per capita, I'll give you the numbers and while we fix the presentation. In terms of income per capita, we're obviously lower than that, but our income per capita is close to $16,000. So it's a pretty big country. I know most of you know about Mexico, but just to give you some reference before we get into our findings. And then we have the social context, and that's how poverty, the poverty levels and inequality levels in Mexico are. In terms of poverty, and there are many, well, as you mentioned several times, there are many ways to measure poverty, but one way, and this is the one that gets more attention in Mexico, shows that almost half of the population in Mexico is poor, according to this definition. And this percentage hasn't moved very much in the last 20 years. As far as the Gini coefficient, which is on the right axis, again, it's also Mexico, a very unequal country. I think one of the most unequal countries in Latin America. I believe almost, perhaps only Brazil is more unequal. I don't know very much. So that's the context, the economic context, the social context of Mexico. And let me show you now the findings we've had with our surveys and research. Here's how people who started in the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, at the bottom quintile, end up. So the children who were born in a family that was in the lower quintile, when we did the survey, where did they end up? As you can see, which one is the pointer? As you can see, this is the, what's this color? Like orange color. Almost 50% of the children who were born in a poor family stayed in that quintile. 22% were able to move a step up to the second quintile, and only 4 out of 100 Mexican children who were born in that home were able to climb the ladder to the top. These are the rags to riches stories, which are clearly very few. And what makes these findings, in my view, more dramatic is the fact that in Mexico, as I showed a couple of slides ago, 50% of the population is poor. So even if they climb one step, they still remain poor. So we have 70%, 7 out of 10 children who are born in this lower quintile, that when they grow up, they're going to remain poor. So this is I think, a pretty dramatic finding. And then we have the opposite case, the riches to rags story, and it's the same thing, but it's a mirror image of the lower quintile. If you happen to be born with rich parents on the upper quintile, the chances that you're going to remain there are more than half, and that you're going to just slip one step is a quarter. So I mean, if you add these two up, it's almost 80% that you're going to remain in this 40% of the population. So clearly, these results are concerning. But how does this look compared to other countries? Here we have a comparison to, well, it's hard to find information about other Latin American countries. Obviously, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, I think we can expect to see, we would expect to see Mexico with lower upward mobility. But I mean, we have lower mobility than the U.S. and lower mobility than Chile, this is the survey and the analysis that Florencia did. So we're not in a good place in terms of upward mobility. How is educational mobility? What happens? How strong is the education of the parents? How strong is the education of the parents with the children? And this, I think, was discussed in many of the presentations this morning, but it's very strong. You see, these are educational levels of people who have parents with no schooling. And I mean, if you're born in one of these families, your chances of getting to university are pretty slim. Whereas if you're born in a family that has educated parents, you're more than 50% that you're going to get there. You can call it that, but there's been some good news in terms of absolute mobility. Compared to, for example, in 20 years, like 40 years ago, the percentage of Mexican children that attended primary school was less than 2/3. Today it's almost 100%. So there's clearly been some absolute mobility. The problem is that even that the tide has risen, these children get stuck in lower secondary. This is like the inflection point. After that, very few children of poor, and this is very similar to children from poor families, but children from parents who are not educated or have, they get stuck here. And as has also been mentioned a few times today, the education premium is here. In Mexico, the premium that you get if you get a university, a college degree, compared to one that you get from just going through lower secondary, it's almost double. So you can expect to earn double what a lower end secondary person gets if you go to college. And the difference here is pretty substantial as well. If you finish high school, if you finish college, you're going to get a 60% premium in terms of your expectations of wages after you finish. So, I mean, this is still a problem. You have the increase in absolute terms in terms of education, but the cutoff point now, before it was perhaps primary school, and now it is lower secondary school. So still a major problem for children who are born in poor homes or that have lower parents with less education. Now here are the findings again. The options to reach higher education levels are still limited. They've improved. To go to primary school, almost everybody does, but to go higher than lower secondary education is still very, very difficult. Sorry. Background does not determine achievement for primary or lower. That everybody has a chance to go there. However, it determines achievement for upper secondary and university education, which are the levels that matter most in terms of income expectations. We also, with our surveys, were able to get some information about gender. Here's a graph that shows what happens with women depending on the father's education. So you have, and their participation in the labor markets. So you have women who are born to a father with no schooling, more than half are unemployed, whereas women who are born to fathers with tertiary education, almost three-fourths of them are in the labor force. Some other findings in terms of gender: women are more mobile, which is good news. The problem here is that the reason that this is the case is that women tend to fall off the top quintile more easily than men, and so that makes them more mobile, but in the wrong way. And then women, to get out of the lower quintile, it's more difficult for them to do. So clearly, the situation for women in Mexico is pretty grim. And then finally, in terms of our findings, I remember from a conference we went to last year, I think it was at Stanford, that David invited us. You see relative mobility in the U.S. Depends on the study that it hasn't improved or it hasn't done very well. Relative mobility is not doing well. It's not people are not moving upwardly as they should. But I mean, there is some absolute mobility that would make it a little bit better. The problem here is that every decile, from the lowest to the highest, has seen their income from in the past 20 years come down. So that's a pretty bad fact, as I say. Okay, so we obviously have a lot more information, but I thought that this graphs, these results, would give you a good idea of what we have found in Mexico. Now, a little bit about the future and what we have done about our policy recommendations. This is the way we see the driving force of social mobility, inequality, and economic growth. In Mexico, as we saw, there's low economic growth, high inequality, so it's difficult to get mobility, and this is obviously the way we want to go, and to increase social mobility. So this again, low economic growth and high inequality is not a good recipe for mobility, social mobility. How to move to a good equilibrium. Social mobility can play the role of driving force. And then, just to wrap up, I think that the center, it has tried to do is introduce one of the, in my opinion, major social necessities today, which is to improve social mobility. It has been a task that we have done almost from scratch because there's very little information. And our goal is to, again, not only generate information, but to research and get this social mobility on the political agenda. Get people to talk about it. Get people to make decisions to promote social mobility. It's been more than 10 years that we've been trying to do that, and I think we've achieved. We made some achievements, but still a long way to go. And lastly, in terms of the invitation I told you about in the beginning, we generate a lot of data. I can't say a lot, but we generate new data, and I know many of you or your colleagues or your students sometimes are looking for new places to do research. I hope the data we generate is free, is available to to anyone who wants to use it. We also sponsor, as I said, people who want to do their dissertation on social mobility in Mexico, who want to use our database. So it is, I hope, an opportunity for you guys to participate in our desire to improve social mobility in Mexico and to find out more about it. Lastly, just before I leave, I just want to take the opportunity to thank the CEEY, which is ably led by Dr. Cárdenas, right here with us, and with other researchers. I mentioned a few, Roberto, who you know, Rodolfo, Marcelo, Fernanda, Claudia. It's a lot of people who work at the center who have done an outstanding job and who are responsible for making this great event happen. So I want to thank you all, and that's it. Thank you very much.